talks.
All right. Hey there. Welcome to Courageous Conversations. This episode, I'm talking with Tristan Matheson. What we're talking about today is male privilege. And what makes this conversation so interesting is that Tristan has actually lived life as a woman and not had male privilege, and lived life as a man and had male privilege. So unlike, I would say, the majority of people, he's experienced both, right? So it'll be a very interesting conversation, kind of comparing his experiences pre and post transition. So Tristan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me.
So first off, one thing I think should be covered before we go too far into this is what we even mean by privilege, right? It was actually a comment on this post earlier today of someone who thought privilege meant you had to apologize for being born a white man, and that somehow you were guilty of a crime for having been born to a white man, right? So Tristan, what do you mean when you say privilege in general? And then specifically, what does male privilege look like to you?
Oh my gosh, I've been doing a lot of self-reflecting and really contemplating about privilege. I actually put in one of my posts on LinkedIn to see what other people thought, because it's an interesting concept. I see it as kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, privilege in its root, you could say, is something that you have what others don't have, right? Or own, or have the option to, or, you know. So, I mean, is it a positive thing? Well, if you have the option to do something while others can't in society, is that a positive thing, right? It can be a positive thing in a very negative light. I'll give you an example. And this doesn't deal specifically to gender, but it is an example nonetheless. Mm-hmm. My mother had cancer. She had cancer, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. So the likelihood of her surviving was a zil. In her case, not all cases are like that, but in her case it was. And I interviewed her because one of my first masters, my research was all about cancer culture. I interviewed her about cancer and how it socially and physiologically impacted her life. And one of the comments she said was, well, you know, because I asked her about being a victim, a cancer victim, right? She said, you know, it's funny, and this is in a very negative situation of having cancer, you know, and going to be dying from it. And she said, you know what? I think of it as not why me, but why not me? And I feel very privileged that suddenly I really get to live. Because when human beings are given an hourglass in front of their face and time's ticking and they know they're going to pass away, you really start to enjoy life for what it is.
Yeah.
So that's an example, I would say, of being in an awful situation, but feeling privileged, right? Then again, you could be in a positive situation, but have a negative impact. So I'm privileged to have white skin, but in what circumstance? Like in society, that's not necessarily a good thing, right? We should all be treated equally, no matter what color of skin or race or sexuality or gender or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But because society isn't equal and is, I have that privilege. Oh. More personally, for being trans, which is the topic of discussion, although I was biologically, and I can't say this for every trans person because I don't represent the whole trans community. I'm one individual. Like, everybody has a different thumbprint, okay?
Yeah.
Everybody has their own story, but I feel privileged that I could even come and talk to you today. Because some trans people can't even talk about their former self. Because it's distressing to them because they're upset about how they were biologically born and it doesn't match who they really are, you know? So I feel very privileged in that sense that I can be open and be able to share this knowledge with everyone.
Yeah.
Would I rather have been born in a outer membrane with a male form? Yes, absolutely. But again, I have the privilege of knowing what a female is in society and what a male is in society. So I have that comparative analysis that I can do, and I feel very privileged about that and be able to share that with everyone. So
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Privilege is a very complex concept. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I've always liked to think of it as just, ways that your life isn't as difficult as someone else's life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are earned privileges, and there are unearned privileges. And usually we don't talk about earned privileges because most everyone is fine with that, right? The fact that earned privileges exist. But most people have some kind of issue with unearned privileges, such as, the fact that I was born with gender and sex that match, right? Gives me an easier life experience in some ways than you. And the fact that my skin is white gives me an easier life experience than other people. And it just seems interesting that, like, that isn't the definition that is understood by a lot of people, right? I had a guest on here one time who, when we were talking about racism, he brought up, well, white privilege doesn't exist. I was homeless before. Where was my white privilege then? And from that statement, it becomes obvious that we aren't talking about the same thing when we say privilege, right? Again, everyone has privileges. And I love that you brought up, right? You have privileges, right? Everyone has some version of privileges. There's some ways that your life is easier than someone else's life. And, like, it's not honestly that big a deal. Just admit it and let's move on here. But it's a sticking point for a lot of people,
Yeah, and even as an oppressed and part of the 1% kind of minority group, a global minority group, being trans, you still have privileges. Even if you're in an awful state where you have cancer and you're dying, she still felt like she had a privilege, She felt privileged that she had cancer and not something else that is 10 times worse, like ALS. So yeah, but privilege is a very complex concept. But yes, you're right. I think people think of it very differently, and think of it more as a positive. And it is a positive in some cases, but they don't think of the flip side as much.
Yeah, cool. Well, so now I'd like to just start talking about your experiences, right? Like I said, you've lived a number of years of your life as a woman before transitioning. So now you experience both sides of the coin, right? So I guess start sharing some experiences with us, maybe a little compare and contrast, right? Let's start with just like in public, right? Whether you're buying a car or ordering a pizza or sitting down in a restaurant, just when you're in public, do you have any stories kind of comparing, contrasting your experience as a woman versus as a man?
Yeah, in the public, it's a really fascinating. So I started very young. When I was actually born with a hormone disorder. So I started very young. When I was maybe 9. I went to the Royal Ontario Museum in Ontario.
Okay.
And I was walked out by security out of the female washroom because they refused to think I was a woman at that time.
Oh, really?
Yes. And my parents were pretty much appalled like that happened, But yeah, that happened. But I did a lot of things. My brother was my mother was very, very pushy about grooming, makeup. She didn't know. This was, I guess I started transitioning when I was 23.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I'm dating myself. So that was quite a while ago. So maybe, I guess 13, 14 years ago. But it wasn't talked about in the media, right? So when I was younger, I was a woman. My brother bought me glamour shots for my birthday. I didn't want to say no, right? Because you don't say no to a birthday, but it was torture. They would put me up. I had maybe 5 layers of makeup on my face. But when I walked out and I was objectified, there was men looking at me, staring, which is it's not always the case like that. But it was very foreign to me in the sense because that's not how I felt. But that's how I was treated. Another example, actually. Yeah. So my mother, this was, I guess, when I first came out. She talked to my kindergarten teacher. My kindergarten teacher's like, I'm not surprised that he's transitioned because he's always played with boys' toys, right? Boys. I was very athletic, right? But when I was younger, I was in public school at the time. I was a bit of a tomboy.
Okay.
And because I I associated more with men at the time and less with women. I was repelled by the guys because girls aren't supposed to play sports. I was in a very kind of rural public school at the time, and it was very gendered. like girls would do skipping and boys would do sports, Yeah. And so I was repelled by the guys because I was a girl, and then I was repelled by the girls because I wanted to do guy things, right? So I was kind of put in that liminal space where I couldn't associate with neither. But it was interesting because women, like you would see the sports teams in that public school, and like none of the girls would ever play sports. And then suddenly when I came there, then they started doing cross country running and stuff like that because I was a huge cross country runner. My dad trained me from when I was a little girl. I would run like laps around the lake in Stratford, Ontario, and we would train. We would time ourselves, and so I came into that school and I was like an athlete. Like I was doing races and competitions, and so you slowly would see the girls being like, oh, maybe I can do some sports. Like, oh my gosh, this is a thing, And so I think it's maybe less like that, and maybe in different pockets of the world. It's not, and even in North America, but that was my experience.
Yeah.
When I was transitioning in mid-transition, that was very interesting because I was kind of between female and male, and I'm not just talking about identification, but in society, when you're kind of transitioning from one to the other, where do you go in certain like pockets in public, like washrooms, like restrooms, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're going, before you take hormone replacement therapy, the endocrinologist or your specialist basically says, you have to be a man, or in my counterpart's a woman if you're a male to female, and you have to be that in society and really understand and come to know what that is to see if that's who you are. That's and so going into a washroom, it kind of gave me flashbacks of my previous experience, getting walked out of the washroom, So yeah. It's finicky. But women are treated very, like, I'll give you an example. A lot of my friends are females. Most of my friends are females, actually. And, when they come to visit, well, not now, but when they came to visit, and we would do like barbecues or whatever, would always say, okay, can you text me when you get home, just to make sure you get home safely, As a guy, since I've transitioned, it's funny because our group is like, they're still like, text me when you get home. And I'm like, okay, but like oftentimes I feel more secure in society walking down the street, a dark alley as a guy than I did as a woman. Right.
Yeah.
I had a really interesting experience in my research when I went to Jordan, and this is for my undergrad. This is kind of in the cusp of when I was a woman transitioning into a guy.
Yeah.
This was in 2010. Yeah, 2010. I went to Jordan for an archaeological dig.
Okay.
And I went as a woman. And so when I went as a woman, I got to know some of the Bedouins, Palestinian refugees, who were settled close to the site that we were working on. It was about half an hour from Madaba. Okay. And they had settled there maybe about 40 years ago they came over from Israel, actually. And so they're nomads, and they came and settled there, and we worked with them. And 2 years after that, I returned. But when I returned as a male, not legally, as in my ID. Okay, but as just transitioning, like getting I had hormone therapy at that time, but I hadn't legalized my identification at that time. Okay. And when I went there, it was really interesting because a lot of the workers that we worked with recognized my face, right? And they're like, oh, And then the director had to explain to them in Arabic, you know, what it was. And it was really fascinating, their reaction, because in the Middle East, and I'm not saying this is a generalization statement again, in the Middle East, it tends to be very like gendered. I mean, like when we went to the site, we would never see the women. They'd always be in their houses. We wouldn't even see daylight of them. Like they were gone. The men were always out, the women always in the house. And these houses were like tin box, okay? Like they were metal tin box in the middle of a desert, which is sweltering hot. So so we and they recognized me, and when the director had told them, they're like, oh, and it wasn't a reaction of it wasn't a reaction, it was a very different reaction. It was like they wanted to know more. They were kind of in shock, but they wanted to know more. They weren't appalled, they weren't like offended, they just wanted to know more. They just wanted, you know, which I thought was very interesting. Oh boy, I wish I could have spoke Arabic at the time. But the biggest, I think the hardest for gender in society, especially during that transition period, was when I left Jordan and I went through airport security. Because in Jordan, airport security acts as this. You have one male line and one female line, right? And and I had a beard at the time, and my passport had F on it. So I had to choose real fast what line I was going in, right? So that was also a very scary situation. Because I mean, they could have seen it and been like, well, whatever. And I mean, it really depends on the individual that you come across, right? In security. So I went into the male line and everything was fine.
Well, I can imagine that feeling of, oh shit.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was. Now, that's exactly what it was. Now, as a man and having been a man, especially the biggest change, I think, from being a female was reactions from others. And I'll give you an example, okay, in business. Okay. My mother was refuting a bill on the phone. Refuting a bill, I forget what it was, but with a company. Yeah. She was getting nowhere. Okay. I said, give me the phone. At that time, I mean, I had a lower voice at that time. Like I had a more kind of a, barely lower voice. And so I took the phone and I said, listen, but a very different reaction. It wasn't the tonality. Was it what I said? But completely different outcome. Why? So what's why? Yeah. Having been in working as part of an airline, my former job, I got to travel a lot. I got to go to a lot of conferences. A lot of them were for like LGBT. I was big into diversity. Went to conferences about like unconscious bias, microaggressions, all the stuff we talk about, right? And the funny thing is, even if it was an LGBT conference and business, from different businesses, you could see the sea of men, the sea of men in the crowd, and especially, which is kind of because I worked in HR and I was surrounded by women and mostly atypical women. So I had to fight to get a word in, which was great, but a sea of men. And then you kind of scratch your head and saying, okay, well, where's the diversity here, folks? We're talking about diversity, but different treatment, communication wise. I know in my communications master's class, what I learned was, statistically, men, I guess they talk over women a lot. And one of the things that I did do a lot and maybe I'm more aware of this now, although I'm a talker. I'm a talker and I get passionate. When I get passionate, I go, but I have noticed that a lot more now that I'm a man. I have noticed that a lot. So different social interactions. And I try to take that into account as well. So for myself.
Now you transitioned when you're 23, so you hadn't spent much time in like a a corporate world as a woman, but even just in your student days, have you noticed anything where people are more or less likely to talk over you, as a man compared to as a woman?
In my education, because I was actually very lucky, because my education, I started doing, I guess I was just finishing my bachelor's. So I went from my bachelor's right into my first master's, which was in communication and journalism. And actually, a lot of that building was women, and we did research about that and the different genders. And so I didn't necessarily. I was kind of in a nest where gender was really treated equally in that sense, because a lot of the journalists and communication specialists were focusing on gender equity and gender in society and stuff like that. Actually, the research chair of Canada is in the journalism building at Concordia University in Montreal there.
Gotcha.
So that I was lucky. I was lucky. I was very lucky in the corporate sector, because of what I've learned. The corporate sector Air Canada. I was lucky again. Air Canada is big on diversity. They have a great company, and what's interesting and about corporate culture, they put so much emphasis on numbers of different demographics. So you have to meet certain numbers, right? So I'm talking about visible minorities, people with disability, blah, 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 blah. And I talked to my director. I said, diversity is easy, right? And this deals with gender as well. Diversity is easy. It's easy to put a board that's full of people from different minority groups. It's the inclusion that's the problem. So, and that comes down to just, again, coming back to communication, and allowing women to have their say, not just barrel on through them and over their, what their ideas, and I said, if you start looking at a position and somebody has the expertise to do that position, we shouldn't be judging them on their color of skin or what they, their educational background too. Even I've met people that have had no degrees and are 10 times smarter than some of the PhDs that I've met. Okay. So, if you show your competencies and have the skills to do what you are applying to do, no matter if you have a disability or not, if you can do the job, you should get the job. So as much as the corporate world is all about numbers, I highly disagree with numbers. It's all about making sure that a person gets the opportunity if they're good enough for the job. Obviously with the hiring hierarchy, it hasn't happened because there are biases. That is a problem. Biases are a problem. That is a huge problem. Okay. So
yeah, and it does seem, I don't know if the word is silly, but at least misguided to focus all your efforts on diversity and not pay attention to inclusion and equity, right? It's like, okay, I'm glad I'm here, but like, how are you going to treat people when they're there? What's their experience in your company going to be like now that they're working there? And that seems to be the harder issue to tackle, right? And yeah, that one is a little harder to track on a spreadsheet, than just the simple numbers. So it tends to get underappreciated.
Well, it's gender, okay? Gender. You have to, you can put a policy up internally in your company and say, okay, you have rights, okay? But if it's not reflective in your culture and like even products, I'll give you an example. This is less to do with gender, but still kind of on the same page. I'll give you an example, okay? Products. Band-Aids, okay? Band-Aids have been produced to match more Caucasian skin. There was never, colored or black Band-Aids made for colored or black people. That is a problem. Why, so it and you're seeing this more and more and more. I actually talked about recently about Mr. Potato Head. I don't know if anybody read that. This goes back to gender, right? And what gender is, and what a family is, and what a family can it could be man and man taking care of a kid. It could be a man, a woman, like a three-person couple that is taking care of a kid. It could be one person, so we're trying to, so it's not just about policy. It's not just about numbers. It's really taking into account how society is in flux and how we get to a point where, men and women are treated equally. They're given equal salaries based on skill, competencies, how well they do their job, obviously, and not based on all the other factors, like the skin, so, or what's, between your legs, right?
Sure.
So, and there is still a huge salary gap, by the way. There really is. And I read a book. I forget what it was. There was a book that I read about gender and how people that are oppressed, and not just gender, people that are oppressed, period. Okay. When you're oppressed, you become very, very comfortable in the oppression. And what I mean by that is, if that's all you know, then you're happy with it because that's all you know, right? So when I'm talking to some of my female friends who are job seeking or have applied and stuff like that, I'm like, don't hesitate to negotiate your salary. Like, don't just take what they're gonna give you and just really push it, and because when you're oppressed, you're like, okay, well, that's what I deserve. Well, maybe not. Maybe you deserve a little bit more, so it's fascinating. Anyway,
Has there been any moments in maybe in your life, especially as you transitioned, where you caught yourself in this female oppressed, this is normal thinking, and then gone, hey, wait a minute. It doesn't have to be that way, especially now that I present as a male, right? Like, dang, now I can actually ask for that raise, right? Have you ever had moments like that in your life? You've caught yourself in that thinking.
Let me think about that one. I don't think I have. I was always, when I would work, and I worked a lot, even during my degrees, because I did back to back to back. I've been in school now for 14 years straight. So, but I did work, and I worked. Oh God, I was a painter, and this is my undergrad. I was a painter, and the painting crew was men, and very like alpha, like men, and which really, funny enough, is definitely not my crowd. And although I was a man, I wasn't. Yeah, the last year I was transitioning. Did they treat me still like a woman? Yes, maybe, in a sense of, oh, can I help you? Can I do this for you? Can I do that for you? Is that, I guess that's the more, how men are, they're like, oh, you should open the door, and those are the kind of the social construct of what masculinity and being a gentleman is, right?
Yeah. Have you noticed people helping you less as a man than they used to as a woman?
Yeah, for certain things, and here's the genderized thing of it all. And comes back to social constructs. If you have to build something or paint something or do some housework, that's like, that's more of a man's job, right? But, social constructs, right? Cooking. Oh, well, you're a man, so you probably don't cook, right? Presumptions, right? It's going back to the masculinity and femininity thing, which again is very, very, very blurred now in society. I have an example of that actually, because my friend, very, very close friend, she's now in a very, very amazing role at a company. She does process improvements. and she says she has a very masculine mindset. And I said, oh yeah, but she's very goal orientated, like results, like very rigid, like, okay, this is the problem. Let's get down to the core of that problem and let's fix it. So that becomes like the more masculine approach, right? And actually her and my former partner, she also said she had a very masculine, which I find very interesting. But she said she also had a very masculine, and I guess it's a social construct. I think. I mean, yes, there are people who are more like goal orientated. Yes, maybe that was tagged towards men more so than women. But does it necessarily mean that it's always men that are goal orientated? Not so much, you know. So.
Yeah, I've often felt that, even if there is, a difference, and you could argue that there is, and I wouldn't fight it, there's a difference between like masculine energy and feminine energy. It does seem like their presence in men and women is pretty well mixed. So we probably shouldn't call them masculine and feminine energy, right? We should call them X and Y, A and B, red and blue, right? Because they're not very tightly tied to the actual genders. It's interesting. Do you find in your past life as a woman, did you align to female gender roles, and now as a man, do you align to male gender roles, or your behavior kind of remained unchanged throughout?
Both. So I was asked this very same question actually in a documentary that I'm a part of called Flux. It was an artist who was doing a residency at MIT. And I told her I would be more than happy to be one of her specimens for that. And she asked me that, and I said, you know what? Although I prescribe to the M identifier, which I fought long and hard about and spent a lot of money on, I still embrace my feminine traits, and I'm very happy about that. From, again, whatever that is, right? And I told her, I said, like, society puts labels on certain ways of which we approach things, ways in which we walk, ways in which we dress, mannerisms, right? Mannerisms. I told her, I said, I'm just happy being a person. I just want to be a person. Frankly, I don't care if people see the way I hold myself as feminine or masculine. Don't care. I don't care if people think I'm, have a certain mindset or I walk a certain way. Don't care. I'm just a person. I'm Tristan. I am a male. I identify as male, he, him, pronouns. But I'm okay with people thinking if I have feminine traits or not, whatever that is. It doesn't bother me. And more so, I feel, again, privileged to have known what it was and those feminine traits that I had. And actually a lot when I was a female, it was more the physical femininity, the physical that I was repelling more than because one of the feminine traits could be seen as empathy. I'm very sensitive guy. I'm very emotional. I'm very attached to my emotions. And I'm okay with that. So I don't have a lot of friends that are male that are alpha male. Is it bad to be alpha male? No, just that's not my crowd. Same as really hardcore females. I don't know, like it is what it is, and I see a person, no matter if they're like a friggin' alpha male or whatever, it's a person, it doesn't matter to me. And that's the way I see myself, and that's the way I expect people to see, me, because that's what it is.
Any more examples of the differences in treatment, right? What about, I don't know, assumed competency, right? Have you been in an auto parts store as a woman and as a man and noticed the difference, or buying a car, or I don't know, anything like that, where you've noticed people have assumed your competency to be higher because you're a man? Anything like that?
The reaction and the results are very quick. I find with my lower voice, especially over the phone, especially in a digital digital age that we are in now, you have more command. I find, unfortunately, it's an unfortunate thing, but I have more command over the conversation. People tend to listen to me more. And I have more of a space. You know, in conversations, like in anything communication, you have a certain space. I find that I'm allowed more space in that conversation now that my voice is lowered. Yeah. Although
both like in the workplace and outside in society, both.
Yeah. But that privilege comes with, again, the other side of the coin. So I'll give you an example. And this deals with product. I was transitioning and my voice had lowered, and I was dealing with my bank. And my bank at that time, every time you call in your bank, they have to ask you questions to make sure you are the person who you are.
Yeah.
So I would say, yes, okay, I'm Gwyneth. And they're like, you don't sound like a Gwyneth. I was like, oh, yeah. But I am. So suddenly just that product and communication and, it was forcibly having to, come out with my story as to why my voice is the way it is. For me, that's not distressing. I'm fine with that, and that's okay for me. For others, it might not be so dandy. So so that's again deals with gender and a product. A product or a service that a company is giving that suddenly exposes people to having to kind of relate something that they maybe not want to relate to. So although my lower voice has given me privilege in some conversations and negotiations or, in the working force, it's also been very, it has its negative impacts as well.
Yeah, right. Never thought about that. But yeah, between when you start transitioning and when everything legally is cleaned up and changed, that would be a bit messy. Huh.
And you find loopholes.
On International Women's Day, a lot of articles were posted on LinkedIn about women in the workplace, and a couple of things that were brought up were that women in the workplace are less likely to find senior people who want to just voluntarily mentor them, right? Serve as mentors for them. One even study pointed out that women are less likely to get actionable feedback in interviews, right? And I'm kind of curious, again, you didn't spend a ton of time, or really maybe not even any time in the corporate world as a female, but have you noticed any differences on any of those things of people being available for mentorship, people giving you feedback, people, really treating your career seriously? Any differences on those lines that you observed?
Not personally, but if there is a problem like that, it's a process problem. There's biases there and people need to be trained. It's a recruitment problem. You gotta look. I mean, if people aren't getting mentored, it's the mentality. It's a cultural thing that's been that's poisoned the pool. Do you know what I'm saying? And that needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed fast because now again, my big corporate experience was Air Canada after I finished my second master's was Air Canada, and I was very lucky because a lot of their leaders, half of their executive board was women. So, and we had a great leadership program that involved many women and men across the board. And so it was a very good, positive cultural environment. Was it a positive environment in all of the business? I have no idea. There's 36,000 people. Right? Yeah. You're not just talking about headquarters and an office. You're talking about cargo. You're talking about airports. You're talking about flight attendants. You're talking. So there's many different little micro cultures in the company, right? Yeah. But if a company is finding that suddenly, on the upper echelons of the company, there's only males and male representatives or male leaders, and they're refusing to, mentor or help, make, allow women to move up that ladder, that is a problem. That is a huge problem, and it needs to be addressed.
One thing that I found profound and, I don't know, scary, enraging, something, is that many times in my life, people have seen potential in me. I have had a really good track record with when I interview with companies, they offer me jobs. Oftentimes jobs I'm not even really fully qualified for. They just see something in me and they identify potential and they're willing to give me a shot, right? Sometimes it's, after I've gotten the job, leadership within the company sees potential within me, right? And I realized just what a privilege that is, because when you're in a cis-het white male culture and you're a cis-het white male, and most of the people in power are cis-het white males, it's really easy for them to recognize potential in you, right? It's like there's no translation, there's nothing needed. Like you're the same type, you're the same kind, so it's easy for them to see potential in you. I cannot tell you how many times cisgender, straight, white, older men have told me, you remind me of myself at a younger age, right? They can see that potential in me. And from what I'm learning, that's not a common experience in people of color and women, especially women of color, right? So it's not like, again, someone necessarily has something out against you if you're a woman or if you're Black. It's just something about a cultural difference, a communication difference, whatever it is, makes it really hard for the straight white men in power to see potential in you. And that is huge when it comes to career advancement, right? Imagine, talk to anyone who's done well in their career and just ask them the question, hey, if early on in your career, if your leaders hadn't seen potential in you, what would be different today? And I'm pretty sure everyone would have been like, oh my God, I wouldn't have gone anywhere if my leaders didn't see potential in me and invest in me. Yeah. And again, if you're a woman or if you're a person of color or, just a disabled person, good Lord, I think that's a big one too, right? I don't think a lot of people who are disabled have the experience of people saying, ooh, I see potential in that person. Let's invest in that person. Yeah. And again, it's not consciously decided to be discriminatory, but the outcome is absolutely discriminatory.
Yeah. Yep. It's relativity. Okay, has a strong hold on, and relativity has can have a negative impact, but it can, and that's one of the things actually when you're doing executive buy-in and talking about how important diversity is and inclusion, more importantly, inclusion, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is, if your inner culture in your company doesn't reflect your customer pool or your clients externally, you're not going to have that relativity. And let me tell you, folks, there's more and more women that are in business and are upcoming and are great leaders and stuff like this. So you gotta, and it's not just about customers and clients. It's paralleling your partnerships. If there's a company that you want to work with and the company sees you in a bad light because you're all men on the top of the echelon and are creating roadblocks for your female colleagues, they're not going to want to align with you. And this kind of puts so much more weight on CSR, which is corporate social responsibility reports, and good for that, because it is so important. It's so important. I was lucky enough, actually, at Air Canada, my former job, I was a trainer, came in as a trainer. And I told my boss, I said, I don't want to be hired because I'm trans. I want to be hired for my skills. And he's like, absolutely. And eventually I became more and more put into diversity. And I was put into diversity more and more, not because I'm trans, but because I was communicating how important it is that we really embrace these things. And a lot of the people of the culture started reaching out to me naturally. And because of that, I got put in that position, in that role. Okay. So I had people from the front line, there were flight attendants that had me on speed dial on their cell phone. And I told them they could reach me at any point in time, because I was constantly in our inner communications channel saying how important it is. And this is what we stand for. And this is what we are. It's ingrained, And I was lucky enough that I was working under an amazing, director who was working under an amazing senior VP of People, Culture, and Communications, Ariel. She's amazing. And she backed us every step of the way, So I was lucky in a sense of being in a good culture.
Yeah.
Is that the same for every company? Probably not. You know, but they listen. It's and I say this time and time again. It's not just grassroots is fantastic. When you have a company that is very active from the bottom up, great. But you really need that buy-in from the leaders. It's the leaders that really, and you have to make sure that they realize the value of having a plethora of different demographics and people from different walks of life. It's so important. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, I'm sure, Tristan, someone who watches this video live or watches the recording is still going to think to themselves, male privilege, bull crap, right? I'm not apologizing for being male, or where was my male privilege when I was homeless, or right? You know, what would you say to those men who still don't see male privilege, who still think it's equal across the board, who still think they have no advantages over women? Any final, I don't know, words to direct them or encouragement for them?
Yeah, just start listening. Simple. Actually, and this is a fault of modern day society. We're in an age where we're more thinking about how to respond than actually listening to what people are saying.
Yeah.
Right. So you're already thinking about what you're going to say before they finish their sentence, right? And that's a huge problem. So just start listening. Just look around. Just look around. It's very evident and very easy. As I said, the example, when I go to conferences, it's a sea full of men. You know, that's an issue. You know, just be self-reflexive, aware of your surroundings, and just take a look. You know, you really, it should be equal all around. You know, and it clearly isn't, and it's clearly evident, and it's not just statistics. You don't have to read statistics to see that.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Tristan. I enjoyed this conversation very much, hearing your experience and perspective on this complicated issue.
Yes, very complicated. Very good issue, though. It's good to talk about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for your time, my friend.
I'm humbled. Thank you very much.